We'll get started and share just a little bit. Thanks for coming out, those that are here in person on a rainy day. Thank you to those that are and will be watching online later. We're glad to have you as well. Well, for a Bible study or devotional today, turn to Deuteronomy, the very last chapter, 34, chapter 34 of Deuteronomy. And it's a very short, brief chapter, but it's all about the death and the obituary, so to speak, of Moses. And so we'll look at that a little bit and about wilderness and wilderness wanderings and see what we can learn a little bit today. But Deuteronomy 34, so it begins, then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. Then the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zor. So first of all, get that picture in your mind. Moses climbs the mountain once again. I think we can assume, according to scripture now, he is about 120.
Just thinking how
Yeah. Yeah, 120 years old. And as the scripture will say later in this passage, he maybe we can remember back, it says he's still full of vigor. You know, Bev, I would say no. I would say that, you know, as these writers remembered age, and you'll notice in the Old Testament that it gets a little more. Now Moses, I think 120, I can see that, but you can see the original men in Genesis. You can see each one mainly. You can see how the years of their life becomes more realistic to our biology. You know, Methuselah, 900 and some years old. But yet by the time you get to Abraham dying and Isaac and Jacob, it's a little more realistic. So, you know, some of this is memory and you know, Genesis, again, when you think of Genesis, now we're in Deuteronomy, but especially those beginning chapters of Genesis, you know, Genesis is answering the question why, not how. You know, why did God create the world? Why does God have a relationship with human beings? You know, or what happens when we're faithful? We live a long life in the Old Testament theology. It's not answering the questions of how. You know, well, how did God create the world? How did these guys live so long? If we get tangled up in that, we lose the message God's trying to give us. But I would think that Moses, this would be, yeah, I can see him 120, God letting him live a life.
He was an old man anyway.
He was old. And we know, as you break down his life, he had 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness. I mean, as a shepherd, when God called him, and then 40 years of wandering. So that's 120. So it's adding up. But he's old, and he has to climb this mountain one more time. Yeah, and he climbs it, and the Bible here gives us a picture that he from this mountaintop he's able to view and look out and see the promised land before him. He can see across the Jordan. I mean, maybe he's even watching the nation cross the Jordan. Who knows? Soon the next chapter or two of Joshua, uh, they um, they crossed the Jordan. So, maybe he's watching that part of his mission take place. And I don't know about you, I love occasionally going up on a mountain, don't you, and looking out on the valley below and the beautiful scenery. But Moses sees the whole promised land that God's going to give him. And then in verse 4, God speaks to him. The Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross into it." So Moses had to hear once more the faithful words of God that he would not be allowed to go into the promised land. And, I think those here remember some of the reasons we give and how these first 5 books try to explain why this is. I look back in Numbers, we know that it's kind of said God would not let him enter the promised land when instead of Moses hitting a rock for water, or he hits the rock to bring out water instead of looking at the rock in faith that God will bring water from it. I believe it's in Numbers chapter 20. And that God says, because you didn't obey me specifically, or you didn't act in faith, this is going to be your punishment. Well, sometimes we think, wow, that's pretty severe, isn't it? And that's a pretty severe punishment or result of this one sin. And we could also think, of all the people who deserve to enter the promised land, wouldn't Moses be at the top of the list of all that he had done? Moses had invested his whole life to God. He had uprooted his family after he had to flee Egypt as a murderer, but he'd found a place and had found a wife, had children, raising a family. Life seemed pretty settled the next 40 years. But then God speaks to him at the burning bush, gives him a mission, and Moses uproots his family, sacrifices, and goes back and does what God asked him to do. He all that he went through with Pharaoh, all the courage he had to have to stand against Egypt when nobody else was with him. We've heard the last few weeks all of the frustrations he's had dealing with this mumbling, grumbling generation that continues to turn away from God. I mean, we can almost, still see Moses in our human mind with the right to say, when God says he's not going to enter the promised land, why me? Kind of with an anguished faith. And I think how we can focus our spiritual journey in wilderness wanderings or having dreams What do we wonder out loud sometimes or shake our heads in confusion? Maybe we have had promised lands that we were working towards and or we visioned happening or we dreamed of life being this way and it didn't come true. Life changed. Life changed. Maybe you've seen some of this. Maybe there is a couple gets married, has expectations. Um, they expect their marital bliss will last forever, and down the road, unexpectedly, nobody can believe it, especially one spouse. There's betrayal, and the marriage ends. Well, that's certainly not the way they envisioned the promised land going. Or maybe a couple or an individual saves up for retirement, and they save up for retirement. The investments are good, the bank accounts are good, they've got plans of doing whatever, RVing or traveling or spending relaxing days with the grandchildren and family, and then something happens and that dream doesn't come true like they expected. One spouse dies, one or the other gets ill, someone becomes disabled, someone has a stroke, and you know, all of the one gets cancer, and you know that the years coming up are not like you dreamed about them when you were younger. You have to shift. These next years are going to be something something different. Um, I had a friend, a colleague, he was older than me, and you know, another situation is that maybe we're forced to retire before we think our jobs were done. That happens a lot. I had that at the mission board. You know, I would see this quite frequently. It was a ministry setting, but it was a corporate setting. And there were forced retirements. There were people that were asked to go because of reorganization. And there was one of the men that was, you know, he still felt like he had energy, he had vigor, and but the executive director said, no, we're reorganizing and we're asking you to retire. You know, you're going to need to retire. And he wasn't that age. And so he, his days of in that role that he had invested 30 some years of life in was gone. It was going to be gone in a month or two. That's not, you know, when this happened. And I remember having a lunch with him one day right before, you know, he was going to retire. And he said, no, Jim, he said, right now, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. He said, I've done this particular ministry and been involved in this mission experience all my life. It is, you know, it right now he was feeling it is my life. Everything I do is about this. What am I going to do? And he was worried about that. You know, his trip to his Canaan, his promised land, had been cut short in an instant. Now, in the succeeding years, and he passed away a few years ago, but he and most people, he found new ministries to be involved in. He found new projects to engage in. He found that there was a life in retirement that he did not think was there, and ways to serve the Lord and feel fulfilled with work and with family. But the shock of our promised lands being changed, you know, and I think, you know, maybe that's some of what Moses may have felt like. And what do we do? How do we overcome that? How do we begin again? Or things are just taking too long to develop. we want something to we want some positive outcomes right now. And we continually, maybe it's in ministry or in church work, or maybe it's in a Awanas. We want those 40 kids back now, and right now we got 10. And it's good. Those children are really receiving, but we remember what it was like before the pandemic, and we can get impatient. When are we going to see parents and children and families ready to come back more? Or will they ever? And what's the next chapter? And those you workers in Awanas might work the rest of your ministry waiting and planting and watering and sowing for a new day to happen, but you may never see it. And yes, yes, yeah. Oh yeah, I look back even in right beginning of 2020 before March hit. Yeah, we would have, between children and youth, 10, 15, 20, here on a Sunday morning. And yeah, so I think these are some of the things we can identify with: frustrations, patience, emotion. But ministry and especially mission work can be a lot like that. A lot of times, mission work is planting the seed, watering, getting prepared for the growth. But in our season, um, we may not see the harvest. Doesn't mean the harvest won't come. And I remember somebody told me when I went my first pastor, and I talked about that a week ago or so, but out in the valley, I may have told you this before. I don't think I'd always been fascinated by it, but I've never had like a vegetable garden, you know. But a lot of the congregation out there in near Stanton and Verona, they had property. And I remember when I went to my granddad's in south of Lynchburg in Brook Neal area. That was a big thing. They would have their gardens, and I'm sure you and Paul lived in places where gardens were big. And here in town, the city, not so much. Some tomato plants, or some people do. But so I wanted a garden. But one reason is somebody told me, another pastor friend out there, he talked about this. He said, it may be good for those in ministry to have a garden. And because one thing is, most of the time, at least you'll see the harvest. That you'll plant something in May, put the tomatoes in the ground, the seeds, and sometime in July or August and September, you're going to be able to pick the corn, pluck the tomato, get the green beans, get the squash. And you're going to see some real fruit from your labor, because he said, and he's right, that's not always the case in ministry, is it? Or missions. I mean, maybe there's a family member, a friend that you've been sharing your faith with for years and years and years. You may never see them accept Christ. Or maybe you witnessed to somebody who moved away, or gave gave food to somebody, or to the homeless, a meal, and it might change their life, but you'll never know it. So missions and ministry, in some ways, is like Moses climbing up on that mountain, all that work that he had done all his life, but knowing he'd never stepped foot in the promised land. But he had a big part of it. And remember, we said, Deuteronomy is kind of Moses's final sermon and instructions to the people before they crossed the Jordan. So in ways we know, well, how do we handle that? We hurt inside. And so negatively, we can pout about that. We can feel bad about that. We can get depressed about that, or we can spend a lifetime denying the fact that we've lost our promised land. We've lost, the original goal or vision we set out is not going to happen. Maybe we don't get a job or a position, and we keep working through life saying, well, one day this position is going to open up. One day I am going to be president of the United States, and I'm going to keep, when it's not a reality, but we spend our energy and our thinking and our despondency working towards that, thinking one day it's going to happen when it's not. So sometimes we have to face the reality, don't we? Maybe I can't physically climb a mountain anymore, but we think that why not? We can. We're going to do it. So negatively, sometimes when our promised lands are not going to come to fruition, we hold on. Other times we bury those hopes. Another way we sometimes do when we bury those hopes in emotional, painful bundles, and we bury them deep in our soul's basement, and they just lay there. And they collect dust and mold, and they pile up, and they pile up kind of like maybe our closets or basements do with junk. But if we just bury them in our soul and our spirit and our minds, and we keep those emotions inside us, do they ever really go away? They're always there, aren't they? And they bubble up. They bubble up sometime, and we wonder, why am I sad, or why am I reacting this way? And one reason is we haven't relinquished the old promised land vision and dreams, and look for the new real promised land. And we don't want to turn loose of yesterday to look at what bright future that we have from God that's going to come. And that's a negative way to do that. But I think Moses has a healthy view of this. One reason I say that is I looked just at the headings previously as he finished his sermon. And in the previous chapters, all of chapter 32 is the song of Moses. Miriam sang a song at the crossing of the Red Sea. It's Moses that sings a song here at the end of his journey. He knew it was the end, and the children of Israel getting ready to cross the Jordan. He sings a song. And then in chapter 33, Moses blesses, he pronounces upon the Israelites before his death a blessing on each tribe. And he foresees and visions and says, this is your potential. These are the blessings you have from God. And so that's a positive outlook, to be able to sing a song of joy. And then to, even though your journey's coming to an end, bless what's going to happen in the future, and trust God that he's going to have something great come of it. But he also continues to remind the people, and one of the main points in this sermon in Deuteronomy is, you will be blessed, you will be successful if you do what? Follow the Lord. Follow God's commands. Live like he wants you to. If you don't, you're going to have real problems. But he gives them a vision as he blesses all of the 12 tribes. You know, your future is bright. You know, you can and will have some success. So we don't see this cry of anger that Moses could have had, but this song and this prayer of blessing upon the people. And so, you know, possibly when our dreams and visions don't come to reality like we wanted them to, or we have to find a new promised land, you know, can we turn that into a spiritual positive in asking God, where is the next promised land you're sending me to? And of course, all of us in through Jesus Christ, we know that we will all get to cross the great Jordan to the most beautiful promised land ever we dreamed possible when we go into glory to live with the Lord, won't we? We all have that promised land waiting for us. But so we see Moses waving goodbye for the last time. I'm sure those 40 years of memory raced through his mind. He wondered what it would be like over there. But maybe I think Moses perhaps then turned his back, looked over the vast wilderness that had been his home for so long, and began to understand that the author I was reading said that maybe his real promised land had been the lifelong journey he had walked in the presence of God, and how God had taken care of him. And after that, the rest of 34, he looks over, God says you can't go in. He has these memories, I think. And then in verse 5, then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there on Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab in the valley opposite of Beth Peor. And to this day, no one knows where his grave is. You know, I think one reason, you know, no one knows where Moses is buried, and that was probably good for this nation of Israel that was to look at God as the one true God, not have any idols in life, because what would have been the temptation if they knew where Moses was buried? Go back and visit the grave, or worship the grave where Moses was, and not God who really led him. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet this back to what you started out with, Gene, climbing that mountain, yet his eyes were not weak nor his strength gone. That's amazing. That's amazing. And he lived 120 years old. I was reading early this week, and I forgot what chapters, you know, Aaron's already died. Aaron lived longer than Moses. Aaron was 123 when he died. He was the older brother of Moses. And so the Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. And then they began a new chapter, didn't they? And maybe that was really one of the real reasons Moses' life ended here. Moses had done what God had asked him, completed his mission. And along with that, he was tied to that generation of Israelites who they heard the reports of Joshua and Caleb, didn't believe it. And that's why they had to wander the wilderness for 40 years. And I know Moses was disappointed in their response and decision, but he was tied to that generation, and none of that generation went into the promised land, the Bible says. And then now Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. So they began to follow Joshua. because Moses had ordained him, set him apart as the next leader. And then there's a brief obituary. Longer obituaries have been written about our loved ones in the paper, hadn't they? Or friends that we've known. But here's his obituary. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever known the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. I think Moses, in a way, did achieve his promised land, didn't he? You know, God blessed him all his years. And Moses doesn't fade from the scene. You know, what he did will always be the focal point of that Jewish religion, the Exodus and Moses' leadership. Read you a poem as we close. And this poet writes a poem, it's called Mountain Song. And it's about his or her experience when they scaled a mountain, got to the peak and looked out. It's kind of real appropriate. This is the poem. She called to me in eerie strains of a love song strung by September's winds. Sympathetic streams deep in my soul, rusty from neglect, echoed her song. She and I longed to make the old music once more. Traversing the valleys, recalling forgotten lyrics, I climbed her slopes and strained to see where I had been. The hills around, like a mother's breasts, filled me with nourishment. I lay down on the grassy crest and reached for the heavens. They were just inches away. In the cloudless night, carried in the carriage moon, I gathered stars before they fell and pocketed them for rainy days. On nocturne's end, I drank the nectar dew. Worries lifted with the morning fog and drifted to the skies. I left the summit for the world below, singing a new song. Maybe that's what we do when one vision ends or a promised land is unattainable that we thought was going to be. We look to sing a new song, a new journey that God has given us. Moses's new song was to be with God forever, and one day that'll be all of our new songs, is to be in heaven with Jesus forever. All right, any thoughts? We talked about end of and we're still going to have some more lessons in this from this little wilderness book. We'll look at a few things from Joshua, and then we're going to look at some things from some prophets as well. But we're going to leave those mumbling, grumbling Israelites in the wilderness for a while. And go to a different page in the Old